How many UA steering meetings have you been to in the last year, and what would you change in the way that steering currently works? So let's start with Jill.
Well, I personally have only been to one UA steering meeting this past year, which is probably a downfall for me. My running mate, however, Gabe Delaney, was the head of steering as vice president this past year. And so I think one big way that we've really communicated on how we really reform the government process and the steering process and how it would work. One big way to reform that is I'm going to go back to the liaison system, but that's because if you have that, or maybe not even the liaison system, but having some way of getting a feel of what the students' concerns are before having the steering meetings, so that you can bring in the relevant administrators and then have them be asked and tackle the relevant questions and concerns for them. So I think a big thing is making these steering meetings the most effective comes from identifying the problem before the meetings occur.
Okay. So I've been to the lion's share of the steering meetings. I counted about 8 of the 10 that actually happened to snow, regarding that. And honestly, it was something that I really did appreciate was the level of the admins again that came in. So I would say that was something that was a great showing by Gabe this year. And again, it was a rather dynamic conversation all the time because he was able to keep questions going. I was really thankful for that as someone who's sitting there first as a speaker and then as co-chair for PRISM. But something that I do think could come back, and I think that would be more important for honing beyond bringing steering into the UA, actually having steering groups break up by either similar interests or divergent interests, and really work on what they think are going to be the biggest issues for the year. Like, they're the ones who should be setting the agenda. These are the student leaders of a plethora of groups, like so many different things, and those are the groups that we love, right? The things that make campus what it is. Those are the ones who come up with the great ideas. They're the ones who are specialists within their individual fields. They're the ones who know every different problem that happens to, say, LGBT individuals, that happens to just general minorities for the UMC, that happens in faith life, that happens in political life for POCO. I think having them really talk a lot more, besides just having admins come in and really collab a lot more, would be what we need to get steering back on its feet.
Yeah, I agree. We really need steering to steer and guide our UA projects and concerns, but we also need to find a way to make sure that they're heard and encourage them to. So our role as the UA should be to create a safe environment, to create a safe space to improve that connectivity and communication between both groups.
I mean, yeah, I very much so agree, but it's agree on the problem, disagree on the solution. I'm a history major. I like to do its work to the past.
Great. So the next question is also about UA steering. So UA steering has grown larger, making the job of the vice president much more difficult. What would be your solution to the overlap between groups? So a good example is POCO being a member of UA steering and its constituent group Penn Dems both having seats. So that's starts with Josh.
Sure. So Dems was, it was grandfathered in. They were an organization on steering before POCO formed and got into steering. That being said, I think that there can be a much more selective process when groups are applying, and also I think a good reform that could come about is actually following up on our attendance policy. Not something that inherently, if you don't come to steering X, Y number of times, like you're immediately kicked off, but at least triggering a discussion amongst other steering leaders of whether or not this group has actually been contributing to steering and steering the university and the UA. So I think that would be a great initiative to try and fix some of that problem. But that being said, there are groups, yes, that overlap right now, but that's because they're grandfathered in. And that's a system that's completely fine. I would never want to take away that from Penn Dems that has been there and a very collaborative, very strong member for steering.
From my perspective, I think that the purpose of UA steering is to be a avenue of vocalizing the student concerns to bring to the UA and to be solved, because the UA is a legislative body. So what are your legislative concerns? Those need to be brought to it. If UA steering could house like every single student group, that would really be optimal. but unfortunately it does become less effective the larger it gets. So we need to find some way. I do agree that we should keep all the groups in UA steering. There's no need to kick people out, but we should also incorporate the new umbrella organizations that are coming in and find some way to bridge the information gaps between the groups and between the head of UA steering, which is the vice president. And so it is the vice president's role to really make sure that information and connectivity goes seamlessly.
Yeah, so again, very much so agree on that as the fundamental, as a fundamental issue. That being said, I do think that we can, create that kind of attendance policy and really have these discussions of whether or not steering is being useful with its current size. I mean, there are definitely groups within steering that have not attended as much as they probably should, and that's a valid discussion for steering to have amongst itself. But like I said before, groups that have been there and have been contributing should never be thought of as, need to be removed.
Yeah, the attendance policy is extremely important, and to enforce that, we need to enforce that in order to get the most out of our meetings.
Great. So the final question in this category. In comments to the Daily Pennsylvanian, all candidates indicated that they would not offer amendments in the current budget process in order to depoliticize it. While all candidates abstained from voting on amendments, one candidate for vice president did offer an amendment to the budget. What are your thoughts on the situation?
Well, I was the vice presidential candidate that offered the amendment, but this was because, it wasn't because I had gone in being like, absolutely no amendments. Well, only a couple minutes before the meeting, class board came up to me and they said, hey, is there any possible way that you guys can amend this? And as our role on the UA, well, our role is particularly to represent the student needs and to let them have an avenue for vocalization. The only way that they can get an amendment is if they have the support of an undergraduate assembly member, or just have them give an amendment. And so I said, well, it is my role, more so than my role as a candidate for the vice presidency, in order to depoliticize the whole process. It's more so my role to just be an avenue for vocalization of our peers. And so that is why I gave the amendment, because I thought it was the right thing to do.
Yeah, I think that's a very valid reason, to be honest. I don't, as a speaker, I don't really vote on things. I'm supposed to be there to chair a completely neutral meeting as far as, how it's actually run and the rules and how it's followed. And I think that, there was an amendment brought up. It was brought up, though, as Julie said, by class board. I don't think that could be leveled against her in any ways. That was an organization reaching out to a UA member, wanting, to change and get a little bit more money, which you can't blame them for. I don't think of it as a major problem. I actually think that, it's commendable that Julie was willing to, put herself out there and work with a, member of PSG. Like, that's what we're here for, like you said, so,
Thank you. Thank you.
Anyways.
Yeah, it's just a way to, class board is another break.
The next section of questions will be about UA culture. The first question is that recently UA has been embroiled in internal political disagreements, and it's come at the cost of productive working sessions. Under what circumstances should the UA consider impeachment of a member, and going forward, how would you ensure infighting would not hinder the UA from doing its job? So let's just do it.
Okay. Well, I think impeachment is a very dramatic situation that occurs when someone has done something that's really offended the majority of not only the body, but the student, not only the body of the UA, but also the student body. So I feel like if you do really believe in something, that something is just or unjust, then you do have the right to voice your opinions. But this also goes back to the problem of the culture in the UA. If you don't feel comfortable enough to go up to them and say, hey, look, you're making me feel uncomfortable, that you have to feel the need to go to drastic measures of impeachment. That's a problem internally or we could fix. And that's what we need to identify so that we can focus on the actual issues of the student body, not the emotional internal issues of the UA.
Yeah, no, I very much so agree with a lot of those statements. Personally, when I found out about the impeachment, I was a little surprised because that word carries a lot to it. To be honest, it's kind of drastic. I don't think that unless you're actually, outside the realm of your job, that it should be brought up. I think what is more rational is actually going and talking to someone. And that's actually why that we have OSA and have Katie, who's our advisor. What boggles my mind was the fact that, you know, if we say that there was a culture on the UA where students who signed this petition felt that they couldn't bring this up to Abe, one, it hurts me because I'm supposed to be the person they bring it up to. But two, Katie's there. And I find it very kind of troubling that that wasn't thought of as an option before. I found the impeachment to be drastic, unnecessary, and frankly, you know, a waste of our time. People were bothering playing House of Cards instead of actually doing the jobs, which is frustrating, to say the least. Yeah, I don't know. I wish they'd reached out to Katie earlier. I'm sad that they didn't reach out to me. And I'm glad, though, that that's what we did end up doing. Was when we found this out, we went to Katie and we asked, can you try and reach out to people and set up a mediation session? And thank God it happened.
Well, first of all, House of Cards is a great show, but it's also a TV show. It's not what happens in real life. And I don't know if going to Katie would have been the first step. It's more like going to your peer. It's like being able to go up to your friend. Like, we're literally all Penn students. So it's like, you know, the problem is if you don't feel comfortable enough to go to another Penn student and be like, hey, look, it made me feel bad. Like, can we work together to make this right? That's what I think the internal problem is. So we have to make it a more better environment.
No, I mean, I completely agree with that as well, but I think that there's like steps you should follow, right? And if the first one fails where you can't speak to another Penn student, which again, as you brought up, you're right, is its own issue in itself, why not take the next step of, you know, bring it to someone who's supposed to be an advisor? And I think one of the things that we can actually do about that is probably introduce Katie earlier on. I know a lot of people didn't even know her, which is kind of a shame, she's a lovely lady. So that'd be my suggestion, at least make sure that people know that that option is there.
Okay, great. So the next question is, looking forward to next year's UA body, what ideas do you have to better foster intra-body relations to yield productive work?
Sure. So one of the big things that I tried to initiate as speaker this year, and I'll call it, you know, a failing of mine, that I wasn't more adamant on pushing the community directors to do this. But I tried to host, you know, social events every month, as well as I asked the community directors to do that. We, you know, got apparel and tried to create like a fun kind of like competition between the committees. Of, you know, everyone got their own apparel and they want to be really passionate about the work that they're doing. And, you know, really trying to do more work and trying to show up the other committees a little bit. I mean, I think that that can work. It's worked in the past, and I think that we just need to push harder with it. Further updates, you know, constantly working. I think with the speaker pro tem would be a good option to really have that communication to the committee directors and really help out making sure that people feel more engaged and people are going to events. I mean, that being said though, you know, when you host an event, a lot of times people don't show up. People can, you know, sit in these very seats and say, you know, we should have thrown more BYOs, or we should have gone to more restaurants, and then they didn't go to it. And I find that kind of troubling as well.
We call it UA SIPs. I think one thing that we really should do next year is get like, you know, a UA social chair. If we want to make the UA more of an amicable environment where everyone feels closer to each other and feels comfortable with each other, we need to have some way to talk to each other outside of that board meeting. Like, when you step to that door, your instinct shouldn't be your own emotions, your instinct should be, how can we help the student body? Because you're there not as yourself, you're there as a representative of your peers. So UA social chair, that's really cool. Another really cool thing we could do would be creating a communications committee on the body, where we can really reach out and do this more outreach and be more effectual as UA.